Thank you for being here today. Good evening, and thank you for the warm welcome and the opportunity to share about my work. I am a Southeast Asian refugee, educator, mother, and LA-based artist with a practice in drawing, painting, public art, and community engagement. It is really an honor to be here with you tonight. This is my photograph when I was about 1.5 years old, which captures my father holding me in front of a makeshift backdrop and behind my identification number for resettlement in the United States. My family and I spent 8 months in a refugee camp in Thailand. I am a multi-ethnic Southeast Asian with a cultural identity that is Cambodian, Chinese, and Vietnamese. My mother's parents left China during the Japanese occupation of World War II and sought refuge in Vietnam, where my mother and I were born. These are drawings I made of my parents. My father is Cambodian and left Cambodia because of civil war, genocide, and Pol Pot's brutal regime. He bicycled to the border between Vietnam and Cambodia and briefly remade a life in Vietnam. Within 3 years, my father met and married my mother, had me, and brought our immediate and extended families to the Thai refugee camp by pretending to be a fisherman and hiding 41 family members under the boat's deck. We eventually resettled in Michigan in December of 1978 and then moved to Los Angeles in 1981. This is a photograph of my family at the refugee camp in Thailand. My father is at the center with both his parents on either side, and on the far right is my older brother trying to hold a pose. All spaces were communal and shared with other families. This slide features a local newspaper article about our resettlement. We were the first Southeast Asian family in Mount Pleasant, Michigan. On the upper right is a photograph of us at the airport in Tokyo during a layover, and below is a photograph of my parents with my godparents, Dave and Karen Jorgensen, who sponsored us to come to the United States. Dave and Karen Jorgensen were professors at Central Michigan University in the late 1970s. The Vietnam War and Nixon's secret carpet bombing of Cambodia killed countless and displaced countless of Southeast Asians. When asked why she sponsored our family, my godmother Karen said, "There was a need, and we signed up to meet that need." We were a family of 8, actually 9, my mom was pregnant. And she and my godfather were worried that no one would help such a large family. I am so honored to share that my Auntie Karen is here to join us today. Auntie Karen, would you please stand up to be acknowledged? We learned to speak English by watching television as a family and studied Mr. Rogers, Sesame Street, and Reading Rainbow. I remember translating American TV shows for my grandparents and was relieved when we would watch the dialogue-less cartoon Tom and Jerry so that I didn't have to translate. I also watched Chinese soap operas with my grandparents before Netflix, Hulu. We rented VHS tapes at our local Asian markets where hundreds of black plastic tape cases lined the walls. My family and I were the first major wave of Cambodians and Vietnamese to resettle in the United States. Our resettlement dramatically shifted the demographics of the Chinatown in Los Angeles in the late 1970s and early 1980s. Before our arrival, Asian American identity and experience were dominated by Chinese, Japanese, and mostly Northeast Asian narratives. My father foregrounded our Chinese cultural identity so that assimilation would be easier. In 1984, Heng S. Ngor was the first Asian American actor to win an Oscar in his lead role in the movie The Killing Fields. The film was about the atrocities of the Khmer Rouge genocide in Cambodia, but Heng S. Ngor had never acted before. And what is more important to remember is that he took on a role that he lived out in real life. Heng S. Ngor was a doctor who survived the genocide and watched thousands of Cambodians tortured, starved, and killed, including his own wife and unborn child. He lived in Chinatown when my family lived there, and he was central to our community. I attended Castelar Elementary School in Chinatown. Indra Lim was a fellow classmate during my elementary school years and is the son of Cambodian refugees. He was one of 3 men who were convicted for the murder of Heng S. Ngor in 1996. Indra was indicted and sentenced in 1998, the same year that Pol Pot, dictator and leader of the Khmer Rouge who enacted the genocide in Cambodia during the 1970s, died. Indra was part of a well-known gang at the time called the Oriental Lazy Boys. The 1980s and 1990s was a period of intense gang violence within Southeast Asian communities linked to refugee trauma and resettlement in underfunded, poor neighborhoods. In some ways, I think my father subconsciously or consciously foregrounded our Chinese heritage to distance us from how he associated Cambodian identity with genocide, war trauma, and now American gang violence. But I have always wanted to connect with my Cambodian roots. I grew up watching my grandmother chew betel nut, uncles drinking Hennessy while they laugh, curse, and cry in Khmer at family gatherings, and the neighborhood auntie grilling lemongrass beef sticks on a small charcoal grill. My dad started taking trips back to Cambodia in the 1990s and now lives in Phnom Penh. As an art student, I would ask him to take me with him so that I can visit Angkor Wat and learn traditional Khmer wood carving. Art would be the gateway for me to reconnect with my Cambodian ancestry. My mother, she loved to sew, and she loved to make clothes for us. On the right is a photograph of my sister, Lammy, and I posing on the front porch of my aunt's home. We wore our homemade dresses with pride. And later, as an adult, when I asked my mom, how did she come up with these special ruffled designs for these dresses, she said, I used leftover scrap material from the factory that would have been thrown away. In Los Angeles, my dad's first job was at a car wash, hand-drying cars, and my mom worked as a cashier. They both dreamed of having their own business, and within a few years, my parents saved money to start a garment factory with 4 sewing machines in a small rented space in Los Angeles. They would also set up immigrant moms with a sewing machine at home so that they can work and take care of their young children. I remember the late nights when my sister and I would lay in the back of a delivery van as my parents drop off stacks of pre-cut material for workers to sew from home. Here are a couple of photographs of my parents' garment factory in the 1990. On the left, my mom is taking a quick lunch break, and on the right, she poses with a couple of her employees. We called everyone auntie or uncle. We spent every Thanksgiving at the factory with all the garment workers and ate lechon, fried noodles, and egg rolls, while also making offerings of fruit and incense to the gods and ancestors. We never had a turkey and cranberry sauce Thanksgiving, ever. We didn't grow up with books at home, other than textbooks from school. I would often borrow books from the public library in Chinatown, and I remember stumbling upon a book published 19th century racist cartoons that also endorsed the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882. This act was the first federal law that banned an entire ethnic group from immigrating to the United States. This law that prohibited Chinese immigration, particularly male laborers, was not repealed until 1943. This is a photograph of the Honorable Mayor Tom Bradley of Los Angeles and a sixth grade me in 1989 when I received third place for an Asian Pacific Heritage Week art contest. My drawing was about the Chinese Exclusion Act. Tom Bradley was the son of sharecroppers and grandson of enslaved African Americans. The international terminal at the airport in Los Angeles is named after him. During his time as mayor, he was pivotal to equity and inclusion before we were even equipped with these words, and he removed barriers for women, minoritized communities, and people with disabilities. Tom Bradley, the mayor, defined the Los Angeles for a young girl who is trying to find her voice as an artist. That experience as a young girl, to be affirmed by her mayor about an unjust, painful time in history that affected people who looked like her, made me the artist that I am today. And here I am with my mother, who rarely took a day off of work to be with me at City Hall to celebrate this art award for a drawing I made based on a 19th century cartoon of Uncle Sam holding up a border wall while racist depictions of Chinese laborers snuck through a crack. About 10 years ago, when I took a visiting professor position at a women's liberal arts college in California, I started to think about my cultural displacement as a Southeast Asian woman growing up in the United States. Playing with Barbie dolls with blonde hair and blue eyes, and never seeing anybody who looked like me on television conditioned me to believe that white is right and white is pretty. In my series of works called Pretty Hurts, I started to challenge Western beauty standards and observe how contemporary cosmetic surgery on Asian bodies can whitewash cultural, ethnic, and racial identity. This is a billboard advertisement for plastic surgery in Rosemead, a city in the San Gabriel Valley in Southern California, with a predominantly Northeast Asian community. The image to the left shows a before image of the client with small, monolithic eyes, darker skin, and a wider jawline. The after image post-surgery reveals a face with wider, double-lidded eyes and blue contacts, lighter skin, and a more narrow and angular jawline. The trends of cosmetic surgery has definitely infiltrated the cosmetic industry and the beauty products that are produced from that industry. Pictured here is a nose roller that is used to make the nose taller, less flat. And here is an advertisement for a nose trainer that appeared on my Instagram feed not too long ago. What is problematic about these products is they're designed to advertise a white model, which ultimately signals to Asian consumers that they need to look more white. So in this painting, The Nose Sharpener, I reference such beauty products that attempt to alter the face. I also reference Chinese feet binding as a form of early plastic surgery in which the small feet, small breasts, and small eyes dramatically contrast contemporary Western beauty standards. Yet I did not want the piece to capitulate to the beauty standards of dominant culture. I wanted a hint of refusal and resistance by placing a cigarette in the woman's hand as she casually smokes and uses the nose sharpener. I also looked at other products such as skin lightening and bleaching creams. I noticed how the advertisements for these products strategically highlight whiteness as the desired effect. For example, the face of the Asian model on the left is divided into a lighter tone and a darker tone. The darker tone is just a sliver on the right as the undesired portion. The whitening mud mask advertisement on the right features a blonde, blue-eyed model with fair skin, again signaling to women that white is in fact beautiful and more desirable. In this painting, Beauty Queen, I began to unpack the desire for lighter skin, or even white skin. This painting depicts the image of a Korean beauty queen whose pre-surgery high school photo went viral. In this image, the light porcelain-like skin is highlighted as her mascara-run face reveals an expression that teeters on winning and losing. This painting in the garden reveals a violent struggle between two women who have had plastic surgery with Barbie doll-hued skin, blue eyes, and large artificial breasts, and a woman with smaller eyes and breasts who is resisting surgery. This piece hints at 19th century Japanese woodblock prints and Persian miniature paintings with the roof removed and windows and walls skewed to heighten the viewer's sense of intrusion. A very common procedure for Asian women with monolithic eyes is blepharoplasty. This requires the surgeon to cut the eyelid, remove the fatty tissue, and re-sew the skin to create a double lid, making the eyes appear larger. In 1818, the German surgeon, Dr. Karl Ferdinand van Graaf, coined the phrase blepharoplasty when the technique was used to repair deformities caused by cancer in the eyelids. But during the Korean War, Dr. D. Ralph Millard, an American military plastic surgeon who was stationed in Korea between 1950 and 1953, developed and performed blepharoplasty on Korean women. He thought the procedure would make them appear more attractive to the American military men who were in Korea. There are also products such as eyelid trainers with strategic advertisements that show the before and after effect, as well as the white model who essentially does not need the eye trainer, but is used to promote the desired effect. From this research of plastic surgery on Asian women, I made a series of over 30 drawings and 30 paintings. The before and after pictures were shocking, as well as haunting. The eyes after surgery became hyperbolically larger, less human, and more doll-like, which heightens the fetishizing of Asian women. But the procedure is very painful, and looking at photograph after photograph and image after image of cutting, bleeding, and suturing, it started to make its way into my work. This drawing is based on a selfie that I found of a Vietnamese woman who had undergone blepharoplasty. The stitches, surgical tape, and bruising remind me that the process of plastic surgery is in fact an act of violence on your body. In this small drawing, in which I reimagine a 19th century Chinese woman performing blepharoplasty on herself, I wonder how much of this violence is self-inflicted, how much of it is imposed by social norms and beauty standards that are really impossible to achieve. Within the last few years related to this work, I have been thinking about art as cultural memory, which is critical when in the particular case of genocide and war, not only are people eradicated and erased, but culture is also eradicated and erased. Since I was only an infant during the wars fought in Southeast Asia, I have no memories of my own and have to rely on the memories of my grandparents, my parents, ghost stories, photographs, Hollywood Vietnam War movies, and American textbooks that retold narratives that did not fully include the experiences of Southeast Asians and our trauma. Memories of the American war in Vietnam were central to snow globes I made that were based on the fall of Saigon in 1975, which is rendered in this iconic photograph of the helicopter at the American Embassy and the thousands of South Vietnamese desperately trying to evacuate. The signal for those who planned to participate in the chaotic evacuation was a secret code on American Armed Forces radio when the announcer said, "The temperature in Saigon is 105 degrees and rising." This announcement was then followed by the playing of the song, "I'm Dreaming of a White Christmas." Those Vietnamese who've never even heard of the song asked their American friends to please hum the song so that we can remember when to leave. These snow globes capture scenes of historical memory that ironically take on the form of souvenirs. But to contrast historical memory, I made snow globes of my family's memories, constructed with the very few personal photographs we have of the time. This is a snow globe made from a photograph of my mother sewing in a refugee camp in Thailand before resettling in Michigan. She's only 24 years old. Many of us left with only the clothes that we had on, and if we were lucky, we were able to pack an extra set or two. In the same snow globe on the other side is a picture of me. When I started to outgrow my clothes, my mother, not being able to afford to get new clothes, took one of hers apart, cut it, and remade clothes for me. As I mentioned earlier, my family and I first resettled in Michigan in December of 1978. This is a snow globe of my family experiencing snow for the first time. Our sponsor, Dave Jorgensen, my godfather, is on the right, showing my family how to build a snowman. On the other side of the same snow globe is my older brother's first Christmas at the age of 11, the first brown boy to experience Christmas in Michigan in 1978. After my family survived intense war trauma as refugees and remade our lives in the United States, I remember playing with green G.I. Joe toys. Now, as an adult, I realize how painfully ironic and twisted the experience actually is. In March of 2020, right before our quarantine, and as we were beginning to understand the effects of COVID-19, my Asian American students expressed concerns about racism. One of my Filipino students was called a gook, and in her confusion, she did not even know what it meant. I was both angry and ashamed about having to explain a racist slur to a student who looked like me. As a Southeast Asian refugee, this derogatory slur reignited traumatic experiences of displacement, resettlement, and othering deeply entrenched in anti-Asian racism, a slur that has been recycled from the Philippine-American War, the Korean War, and to the Vietnam War. This kind of militarized violence and weaponized racism has disturbing origins in children's toys that are acted out in play, such as this toy gun made of cast iron from the late 19th century. Every time the trigger is pulled, the white male figure kicks the Chinese male figure from behind with the words, "The Chinese must go," brazenly displayed on the gun's handle. And my response? My response to such vile acts of racism is resistance and advocacy that is born out of the labors of resilience. My name is Phung, which means phoenix, a mythical bird that rises from its own ashes after the end of a life cycle. It was given to me by my grandfather. As a child, I was told my name sounded weird and un-American and that I should change it. I would go to gift shops and find many souvenirs with English names, but could never find mine. From this experience, I wanted to make artwork that recognizes people with un-anglicized names, to honor their choice to keep their names, and to pay homage to my parents' labor and my experience as a garment factory kid. And for refugees who, unlike immigrants, did not choose to come to the United States, but had to abandon their homelands in order to survive. For refugees, assimilation and displacement are intense disruptions on so many levels. Years ago, a colleague gave me an LA Times article that explained why donut boxes are pink and how that trend was connected to Cambodian donut shop owners who ran close to 90% of California's donut shops. The LA Times writer was not Cambodian American, and my immediate response was, why is my colleague giving me an article about something I already knew, something that I grew up with? Everyone in our community either worked or knew somebody who owned or worked in a donut shop. So this interaction activated the determination to make a body of work that would foreground my community's narrative from my community's perspective. I began to make portraits of Southeast Asian refugees on pink donut boxes, and each drawing is a sensitive portrayal of a unique personal story that is hinged to post-colonial war trauma. And it was important to me that each story is unique and personalized and individualized so that we are not swept under the same umbrella of trauma. This is a portrait I made of Ritipan, an internationally renowned filmmaker who lives in Paris and survived the genocide in Cambodia. He witnessed his family starve to death and eventually confronted the killer, Khmer Buddha, in his documentary film. He wears the krama, a traditional Cambodian scarf that contrasts the ghostly image of a pineapple to reference the Khmer Rouge slogan that the regime has many eyes and is constantly watching. This is a portrait that I made of Vanath, an artist who grew up in Battambang, Cambodia. In 1978, he was sent to Tuol Sleng. Tuol Sleng was originally a high school that was then converted to an execution center and prison camp. Out of 18,145 prisoners, Vanath was among 12 who survived. He was kept alive to make sculptures of the dictator Pol Pot. And because there are no existing photographs to document the torture and brutal executions that took place in Tuol Sleng, Vanath painted these horrifying scenes from memory so that we can see what the Khmer Rouge tried to hide. From there, I started to think about the children growing up here in the United States, and I made this portrait of Visath Uk. He was born in a refugee camp in Thailand to Cambodian parents and eventually resettled in Long Beach, California, in underserved and over-policed neighborhoods where he entered gang life to defend himself from ensuing violence and rival gangs. He described his family's experience as leaving one war for another. After the death of his older sister, he was determined to transform his life. Uk put himself through culinary school while working multiple jobs and eventually became a successful chef. After making these drawings on pink donut boxes, I collaborated with Self-Help Graphics, a nonprofit arts organization in Boyle Heights, California, traditionally started to represent Chicana artists who don't have representation, but now currently expand to underrepresented and artists of color. And with them, we made a series of silkscreen prints that pictorialized donut kids. These are children who grew up with families that own donut shops. These donut kids were second-generation Cambodian American. They would be taken to the donut shop at 3 in the morning and slept on a bed of flour sacks while their parents made donuts before being woken up to go to school. Donut kids play this very important role in bridging the American child with the refugee parent. And this print that I made is of Andrew Huynh. The pink scene in the background is a halftone image of a childhood photograph where he's playing with Legos at the family donut shop after school. The portrait of him as an adult hovers above. Andrew recently began his career as a psychiatric pharmacist and is an assistant professor in pharmacy. But before that, he was known as Bandy Andy, a rap artist whose dynamic lyrics boldly describe his experience as a son of 2 Cambodian refugees in Long Beach. Y'all didn't know Asians can rap, did you? This is a portrait of Dorothy Chow, who is also a donut kid. You can see the images of her as a young girl at the family donut shop that create the backdrop for her portrait. She now runs her father's company, B&H Bakery Distributors, which supplies ingredients and various equipment for donut shop owners throughout California. She also produced a podcast called Death in Cambodia, Life in America, where listeners learn about her father and how he survived the genocide in Cambodia and then remade his life in the United States. And then I made this portrait of Ratana Kim. The pink scene reveals Ratana's father in the early days of the family's donut shop. The donut shop is a space where the family earns their living, learns to speak English, gather, and kids come home after school to do their homework. In this portrait, I really wanted to gesture at generational structures and the practice of passing down. We pass down stories, we pass down businesses, and unfortunately, we sometimes pass down our trauma. I have read that it takes about 3 generations for a family to assimilate into a new culture. The most tragic part about assimilation is cultural erasure. For many refugees and immigrants, preserving culture and maintaining the language are incredibly difficult. Parents would speak to their children in Khmer, and children would respond back in English, but at the donut shop and in the household, everyone knows what vaino means. It means to make donuts, but literally it translates into hitting the donut. Many phrases and cultural customs are unique to the donut shop landscape. These phrases, such as open 24 hours, remind me of the immigrant labor, the endless work, and the intense sacrifices that are made. Mom would take the day shift when the kids would come to the donut shop after school, and Dad would take the night shift and hope that the schedules overlap so that he could see his family. These phrases may seem tongue-in-cheek at first read, just as pink seems to blush with delight at first glance. But when you dig deeper into what you are reading and what you are looking at, it is really a reminder of who are you buying this from? Who made this for you? And what kinds of transactions do you participate in? For donut kids, there are always questions. Questions about where did they come from? Who are they really? Stuck between cultures and navigating identity are complicated and entrenched in questions about when to hold on, when to let go, when are you real, and when have you sold out? Connecting with my Cambodian identity has always been through art. This is extremely important, especially when we consider that 90% of artists in Cambodia died during the civil war and genocide between 1975 and 1979. Cultural memory, heritage, and tradition were almost erased. Now, as a mother, I worry about my sons not having a connection to our refugee experience, to our ancestors and to ancestral land. During the summer of 2023, I was able to take them to Cambodia, and as a family, we visited my father who lived in Phnom Penh, Cambodia's capital, and we made our pilgrimage to Angkor Wat and several sacred temple sites that have endured for centuries. It was truly a wondrous and magical experience. And for those of you who've been to Cambodia and visited these temples, you understand what I'm talking about. The temple complexes, sculptures, and relief carvings were breathtaking. They told the stories of our people who survived a brutal genocide that killed over 2 million Cambodians. That genocide also exterminated artists, many who held sacred cultural traditions that have been passed down for generations. That trip to Cambodia has made me feel so fortunate to be an artist and to deeply reflect on the concept of home as a refugee who has been displaced. This return home in the context of the diaspora and the return home as a tourist, which is ironic and confusing. While in Cambodia, my sons and I felt the terribly bleak contrast of the beautiful temple sites and the headless statues of Khmer kings, Hindu deities, temple guardians, and a Buddha. Buddha looked violently decapitated. We saw and felt such violent destruction of Khmer statues that were broken, stolen, and looted. In sanctified spaces where our ancestors and divine are to be venerated, headless bodies sit quietly on wounded pedestals, archways, and niches. It is truly painful to see and to know that the heads and missing parts are now housed in museums in the United States, Europe, and Australia. The looting of Khmer statues and antiquities began in the 19th century during French colonialism, then in the 1960s and 70s during the wars fought in Southeast Asia, and peaked in the 1990s when the defeated Khmer Rouge, who hid in the jungles and desperate to survive, began to break the statues and illegally sell them in the black market. But the Buddha head as a decorative item, garden motif, candle, and commodified object is pervasive and normalized, which is rooted in violence and the many Buddha statue heads on museum walls, pedestals, and in vaults. Here is an image from an inventory of Buddha head objects you can purchase from the Amazon website. I'm not endorsing this. You can easily find these objects in various home improvement stores and commercial retail stores across the United States. The Buddha head, detached from the body, is so pervasive and normalized. It is also so in Western art historical scholarship, as can be seen in this book on Southeast Asian art by British author and art historian Philip Rawson. So for me, my current work is about returning home through the lens of repatriation, of the returning of the head to the body as symbolic of refugees living in diaspora trying to navigate home. I have been looking at Cambodian statues, particularly the heads in American museums, and this is a Buddha from the Met collection in New York and has been returned in December of 2023. On the left is a drawing from the Norton Simon Museum, which has had many, many artworks from Cambodia that have been looted. And on the right is an image from the vault of the USC Pacific Asia Museum, where I know the curator, and she allowed me to go into the vault to take a picture of it and to make drawings. In these are Cambodian statue heads from the Cleveland Museum of Art. To the left is Lokeshvara, known as the Lord of the World, and to the right is Deva, which is a Hindu and Buddhist god. All the drawings are framed in gold to reference the context of the museum. And to contrast that, I made these translucent banners that look like funerary banners with images of photographs that I've taken from the temple sites in Cambodia without their heads. The images of the statue bodies are printed on this translucent fabric to create an apparition-like experience and to create the feeling that you're entering a temple. A ritualistic performance by classical Cambodian dancers is necessary to make the bodies whole. And in this space, I wanted you to feel that. I wanted the dancers to give you the context of ritual and spirituality. For an exhibition that I did in Los Angeles, I collaborated with Cambodian-American dancer Mia Lath, who studied rigorously with internationally known dancers. And she helped facilitate this ritualistic dance in the space. In addition to that work, I created a free app that you can download on Apple and Google Play, which looks into the complications of repatriation, colonial museum practices, and how do we together protect, steward, and share this cultural heritage. And this app is called Return Home. How to experience joy and pleasure after genocide sounds impossible. And Cambodian art historian and scholar Barrett Lee reminds me that the Cambodian nation has to reinvent its identity in the aftermath of genocide. And the experience of trauma is neither poison nor cure, but contain both poison and remedy. Turning poison into medicine and transforming suffering has been core to my artwork and to the way I live my life. And I saw this transformation and the rebirth in Cambodia when I looked at wild growths of trees that hold together but also can break apart the ancient stones of temples. My sons and I saw the headless statue of Lakshmi at Angkor Wat with missing arms, no head, but she was still adorned with a tiara, finest Cambodian silk, and honored with incense, votives, flowers, and fruits. And that what it means to return home. And that is what it means for me to make art. This year marks the 50th anniversary of the fall of Saigon and the Khmer Rouge takeover in Cambodia, which occurred in April. Cambodian New Year always lands in April. And every year, Cambodians back home and in diaspora have to both celebrate and mourn. To balance grief as well as joy and hope for the new year is connected to this complicated and difficult task of an artist who understands the urgency to preserve a history and culture that was almost erased, and at the same time create something that propels us forward into the future. It is now my absolute honor to share the sacred tradition of classical Cambodian dance with you tonight. Developed as a prayer and movement, classical Cambodian dance or royal court dance is a sacred art form that is over 1,000 years old and comprised of 4,500 distinct movements and gestures. Dancers were believed to be the bridge between the gods and the kings. Before the 20th century, dances were only seen during important rituals and ceremonies. The French Impressionist sculptor Auguste Rodin first experienced classical Cambodian dance during their first official visit to France by King Sisawat of Cambodia in 1906. Many of us are familiar with Rodin's work, The Thinker, but we don't know the 150 drawings that he made within 2 weeks when he stopped everything and followed the dancers to Marseille in 1906. 150 drawings. But during the Khmer Rouge genocide from 1975 and 1979, the classical Cambodian dance was nearly destroyed as 90% of artists died. After the genocide, the surviving artists revived the arts and established the Royal University of Fine Arts that preserved Cambodian dance, music, and visual art. Among the first graduating class were master dancers and choreographers Sophaline Chiam Shapiro and Sharia Burt. They went on to train and nurture young Cambodian Americans such as Mia Lath, who continues their important cultural work and showcase the sacred art in the United States. And we are so fortunate that we are able to bring you a classical Cambodian dance performance on stage now by modern Apsara. Before we bring the dancers to the stage, I would like to take a moment to introduce the dancers and the dance. Mia Lath is a California-based professional classical Cambodian dancer and instructor. As a former refugee in an underserved community in Long Beach, California, she uses the sacred art form to connect to her Cambodian roots and empower her to continue the rich tradition through performing and teaching. Over the past 2 decades, she has performed throughout the United States, including the Jacob's Pillow Dance Festival and Smithsonian's National Museum of Asian Art. During the production of Walt Disney's animation studios' Raya and the Last Dragon, she was one of the core cultural consultants. And Mia's passion is to bridge the diaspora and the rest of the world to Cambodian heritage and elevate the quality and integrity of the dance. In 2022, Mia Lath founded the Modern Apsara Company, a premier Cambodian performing arts organization based in Long Beach, California, which is dedicated to connecting the modern world to the magic of classical Cambodian dance. From performances, training, and workshops, Modern Apsara Company seeks unique opportunities to showcase the beauty and resilience of Cambodian art and traditions. One of the other performers, Malen Sam, trained and performed from a young age under the tutelage of her mother, Chan Moli Sam, and various dance masters and teachers from the Royal University of Fine Arts and the Royal Cambodian Ballet. Over the span of over 40 years, she has performed at Jacob's Pillow Dance Festival, Lincoln Center, Kennedy Center, as well as international stages in Turkey, Taipei, and Cambodia. She is currently an advisor and instructor with Modern Apsara Company. And the third performer is Don Savan Courtney Pom, who is a young Cambodian-American dancer from Southern California. She has discovered classical Cambodian dance from her aunt and learned the art form at Khmer Arts Academy. Courtney continues to appreciate different cultures through dance engagements and values how cultural dances can preserve and activate the history of various communities. So the dance performance you'll see today is called Robam Chui Chai Davata. Chui Chai Davata is a sacred dance usually performed in ceremonies to ask the divine spirits to bless the people and the land. The dance is accompanied by a song with lyrics that speak of the offerings presented to the celestial beings and expresses the beauty and elegance of the women who dance. Thank you so much, and let us welcome the crews or the teachers of Modern Apsara Company.
Like